Hello and welcome to Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started. Our catalyzing statement is a successful entrepreneur inside of every business. Enjoy this module. Hello and welcome to this module, the toleration tendency. And this one, I think, goes deep to the soul because it's so attached to your purpose, the purpose of your business, the values, etc. And Rick, I believe, has identified attributes of tolerance, and these are negative attributes, incidentally, when you have too much tolerance, as it pulls you and your business away from your value systems. So Rick, I tolerate you. Explain that to me. This is actually kind of a serious module, so I thought I'd throw a little levity in. But nonetheless,
there's clearly something psychologically wrong with you.
Yes.
You tolerate me. But let's get serious for a minute. I believe that what we tolerate can be completely destructive to our life and to our business. And one of the examples of that, for me, it's near and dear to my heart, is I love eating. And I also love working out. So I compensate for overeating by working out too much. And it occurred to me a couple of years ago, why am I tolerating putting garbage in my body? What is that about? See, the word toleration is a strange word. And I really started peeling the onion on what this word could mean and the implications of the word when I started looking at Steve Jobs. It's been said that Steve Jobs has a really, really, really low tolerance inside of Apple for things that aren't done perfectly and according to their values. And I started thinking about that. And Steve Jobs has now passed on, but he's left a massive lab for us to look at. Walter Isaacson wrote a book by the name Steve Jobs, and you could look at Steve's life. And as you read this book and look at Steve's life, you'll understand his relationship to the word tolerance. But I believe if we can figure out how we can use this word to leverage our businesses and our personal lives, we will get simplicity and much more probability. So where do you want to start?
well, I think it's starting to enumerate maybe some of the things or areas that we find tolerance. So, and we'll probably in the application side, talk about how to apply some of this. But starting out with employees, sometimes we're tolerating employees in a business that we shouldn't be tolerating. That's a big one and a very common one. I think our environments. So we get so numb to our environments every day, and you're tolerating an environment that is substandard to what your values are. For example, clutter, chaos, disarray in an environment, visual noise, etc. These are things that are a drag on what you're trying to get done. You might be tolerating little things. Like I can tell you walking into, for example, doctor's offices. I could walk in and I see spots on a rug. And what does that tell me? Here's a rug that's got stains in it. Now I know the staff and the doctor walk into that office every day and they see those stains, but they're numb to them. They don't even really recognize them anymore. They know they're there, but they just got used to it, kind of a thing. So, and it just drags the standards of quality and pride and all those good attributes of a company down when you start to tolerate. And I believe toleration also is extraordinarily insidious. In other words, maybe the stain was only the size of a nickel, and maybe it was just like one faint one there that wasn't such a big deal, but because it was tolerated, there was a second one and a third one, and they started to expand and grow. Maybe your desk was a little bit cluttered, or then it starts to expand and grow, where over a period of time, you're tolerating now something that is taking away from what it is you're trying to accomplish as far as the purpose of your business, your profitability, the joy and experience you have, etc.
I like the word you used, Patrick, which is insidious. Look back at the name of this module, the toleration tendency. We as human beings have a tendency to tolerate things, and they start small, and Patrick used a pretty mundane example like a stain on a carpet. But think about your marriage. What are you tolerating there? And I have a very close friend who's in a horrible marriage, and he's been complaining about it for years and years and years. I said, you have a choice. Fix it or end it. But since he's like me and he believes in being married for life, he's got to fix it. So what he's tolerating in his life is not ending the marriage, and he's tolerating not fixing the marriage. That's a form of toleration. You look at your life. Just recently, I was in Patrick's office, and I commented how clean it was. And what we talked about was, how long were you tolerating an office that wasn't up to par with your purpose and your vision of your life? And what was that process like?
Well, it's exactly what we've been talking about. Basically, it starts off as a little thing, and then you have many projects that start, a lot of things going on, and you keep having things out saying, well, I'm still working this, so I'll leave it out. And then your desk starts to get a little bit more cluttered, and then there's boxes maybe that sit around. And it got to a point for me where it got intolerable, and it was, the switch flips, and I say, that's it. Putting it on the schedule. As a matter of fact, it was our accountability calls that got this done, because we have to pick 5 quarterly goals, personal 5 quarterly goals, professional or career, and then the 10 and the 10. And I finally just said, looking at my office, I am going to completely reorganize, clean up, and get this office where I want it. It became one of my quarterly goals. I committed to it. I had my accountability partners to hold me accountable to it. And next thing you know, there's a transformation in my life that allows me, rather than walk in and see visual noise, it allows me to see open space, cleanliness, organization, and it completely changes my brain and how I can think from the start of my day. But I think about, my God, how long did I tolerate a environment of visual noise that was taking me away from my purpose before I finally acted upon it? So if I had done this toleration module prior to that, I might have acted on that a lot sooner. And that's why we're hoping that this is the moment in time where you'll pause there. And I'll tell you, I think one of the big ones are employees. When you have to start making excuses for an employee, where you start to tolerate, well, she had a bad day. Well, she's having a hard time with that. Well, he's got this issue with this other thing that he has to deal with. And as a result, you're making excuses as to why you're tolerating behaviors. And those can be performance behaviors or personality behaviors, what have you. But you start to tolerate these in your business, and they start to become insidious. And the next thing you know, the culture of your business is completely corrupted by that.
Yeah, I happen to walk into a lot of different companies and look at them, and have over the course of many years. And I want to read something to you that I wrote about this topic. Whenever I get involved in a poorly managed company, I realize that the culture simply has a high tolerance for behaviors and practices that add frustration, moving parts, off-purpose energy leaks, and all kinds of additional moving parts to the culture. Off-purpose energy leaks. Think about that. So we think, well, toleration, Patrick brought up spots on a rug, but the reality is there's implications in all areas of your life. What is your business tolerating right now that if you put an end to it, it would open up the future? When I look at my life, I look at, if I'm about to get involved in a behavior or a relationship or something along that's going to take time out of my life, is this going to get me closer to my purpose or not? And oftentimes we are tolerating things that keep us off purpose. That's the main thing with toleration. We are tolerating things that are taking up time. Let me give you an example. We tolerate all of this electronic creep into our lives. Now, we promise you that year 2 is going to be about accelerating year 1 modules. We talked about this in year 1. And the bottom line is, if you haven't cleaned up and organized all of the electronic creep in your life that's getting involved in your family life and keeping your children learning how to communicate with each other, etc. I was recently in a home of a relative where the electricity went out. And the parents of the children who were there, where they played card games and Monopoly and everything else, were ecstatic about the fact that it was the first time that they could remember talking to their kids other than telling them what to do or asking them how school was. They literally had 3 full days with no electricity, candlelight, communication. So this topic of toleration, we've touched on it, we've given you some examples, is massive. It goes through all areas of your business, all areas of your personal life, all areas of your relationships, right down to health and fitness. So what we've done in the implementation guide is break it up into different areas of your life that you're tolerating things. And toleration could be positive as well. I want to read something else to you. At the end of the day, I've realized for me that the more I become aware of what fuels my purpose and my values, the less tolerant I am of anything that moves me away from that. Why don't you consider having that as a morning affirmation? Because you're tolerating behaviors, and when you tolerate them, whether they're yours or somebody else's, the only thing that can do, think about this, is move you away from your values and your purpose.
So as we start to frame this up, as we're talking about toleration or tolerance, the opposite of that is intolerance. And Rick, you describe it as a muscle that you develop called intolerance. I don't know that you suddenly just wake up one day and say, I'm intolerant. I think it is something that's a developmental process that's through intention. I think tolerance and entropy have a lot in common. When you start to let things incrementally fade, disassociate, disorganize, disintegrate, etc. Health is a tolerance or intolerance thing. Relationships are a tolerance or intolerance things. Businesses, of course, are a tolerance or intolerant thing. Even think about profits. Maybe you're tolerating reduced margins in your business. Maybe you're working harder, making less money, but you kind of slowly got there over time. You're looking at little losses in your market share, maybe the amount of money you're collecting per client that comes into your office, any number of things like that, that suddenly there's this little fades. Here's the easy ones. An employee comes in one day and goes totally postal, and you fire them because you wouldn't tolerate that. Those are the easy ones. They're really, really obvious. The ones that aren't so easy are the little, insidious, incremental ones that you start to just let creep in, as Rick used the expression, creep over time. And those are the ones to really start thinking about or start to put a filter on for you. And I believe that this is not a complicated subject. It's not something that requires a lot of in-depth explanation because it's complex or it's abstract or it's esoteric. This is a simple one, but a powerful one, and there's power in its simplicity. We don't really have to explain a lot to you what tolerance is. We definitely want to talk to you about how it shows up and what its implications are. And when you start to recognize them, our hope here is to literally motivate you to start growing this muscle called intolerance.
And let me add a little bit of color to the intolerance word. As Patrick said, they are two sides of the same coin. And I have two examples of close friends of mine. I have a friend who's a multimillionaire, and his wife he never worked until recently, and he's in a union in the Northeast. He never made a lot of money. In fact, the most he's ever made in a year is $80,000. His family, from the day they got married about 30 years ago, was intolerant of spending money wastefully. So these people were not overly cheap. I have had dinner and lunch at their house many times, but they were intolerant of waste at any level. And because of that intolerance of waste, financially and otherwise, they were able to save money, and they were able to upgrade their home several times, and they were fortunate that they bought a home in an area in the Northeast that appreciated, and so they were able to make a lot of money on their home. But with the low salary that he had been getting over 30 years, had he had more tolerance and spending money, like most people spend money, he wouldn't have what he has now. So this intolerance of things that are outside of your values. So one of his values was to be smart with his money. If he was more tolerant there, he would never be in the position that he's in now. And now, as we embark on a recession that's lasted for several years, some would argue we're not in a recession, but arguably we are. Here he is, and he sits very well right now. I have another friend, to use the same example. He figured out, as someone who earns a nice living, he broke up his year into how much money he makes per day, 7 days a week. So I want you right now to think about, how much money do I make a year? So for sake of example, let's say that you make $100,000 a year. So how much is that? Let's call it $300 a day. What this guy does, which is so great, is he realizes of the $300 that I make each day, this percentage goes to Uncle Sam, this percentage goes to savings, This percentage goes to necessities, and I have $15 left over to do whatever I want. Well, I choose to save 10 of that, as an example. He makes a little bit more than $100,000 a year. He's broken down his income to the point that he doesn't tolerate not putting his money in the proper buckets so that he could take care of his family. So this word toleration is a massive word. And Patrick and I, in this module, wanted to indoctrinate you in this word so that you could take this word as far as you want it to go.
Another example comes to your customers, clients, patients, what have you. There's a bias, I think, in business, and sometimes I think it's erroneously taught, that the customer is always right. It doesn't mean that we don't want to have high service values and we don't want to really serve these customers, et cetera, these patients, whatever your business style might be or however you like to characterize the people who patronize your business. Bottom line is this. I remember, due to a patient when I was in practice as a chiropractor, I can remember when I had a patient that was a real drain on my entire staff. They would show up, make demands, be unreasonable in those demands, complain about everything, want to pay for nothing, but we always said, our value system is to service our people and to accommodate all their needs in the best way we possibly can. And I realized I was tolerating because I had this thing. Maybe I read a book some time ago. This is going back over 20 years ago. But maybe I read this book or something that said, the customer is always right. And it was about high-level customer service. And then I remember one day I finally said, I can't tolerate this anymore, because I was looking at what it was doing to my staff and demoralizing it and taking our energy away from the good patients in the practice. So I finally said the customer's not always right. That literally we have standards. It was going back to the doorman principle and saying, I had to put a doorman up front now that said, we got to keep people like this out. And then ask those people to leave, and then moving forward, never let them into the door of our lives. So you might find that many times you're tolerating things based on dogmatic bromides that you adopted, like the customer is always right, from way back when, from your mother's, father's, teachers, and preachers. So and this gets into some deep psychodynamics, because a question we have to ask is, why do we tolerate? What is it that causes us to tolerate things that we really shouldn't be? And I'll contend that one of the answers to that question is something that you learned a while ago that you've held as an unconscious truth, and when you actually step back to assess it, you find out that maybe this is a belief that I'm holding on to that's erroneous. And I believe that this module and the conversation that Rick and I are having with you right now will get you to now question a lot of this and help you transcend it and grow that muscle called intolerance.
I would like you at this point to think about what you learned in year one. You could just go to the front page of the website and look at it. All of those 12 foundational principles of business are now new bars for you when it comes to tolerance. For example, I have a stop doing list. Am I tolerating doing things that I shouldn't be doing because they're already on my stop doing list, but I forgot to stop? I have rules around leveraging my time through using rhythms and habits and rituals. Am I tolerating my schedule not being tight? What am I tolerating in my life? Am I tolerating how certain people talk to me? I have a very close friend who, her husband doesn't get along with her mother. So I'm not sure it's the first time in the world that a husband didn't like his mother-in-law. But it's interesting, when my wife first met my mother, and my mother, a very old-fashioned Italian woman, liked to fight with her daughter-in-laws. And as you know, I come from a big family. The first time my mother met my future wife, I said, Ma, I will not tolerate you not getting along with her. So I want you two to hug each other right now and say, I love you. And we've never had that in our marriage, never. And I have other siblings in my family where there was always a level of toleration. So the point is, you are in control of your life. You are in control of what you tolerate and what you won't tolerate. This module has many, many facets to it. And after doing the implementation guide, it'll take you down roads and help you think of things and think of ways to stop tolerating nonsense and being intolerant of things that put you off your values or off your purpose or off your objectives. So to add one more thing before we wrap up, are you tolerating complaints and excuses? Complaints and excuses are insidious and hurtful and damaging to someone's being, to families, to companies, to organizations of all sizes. I remember several years ago, there was that purple band that said, no complaints, and if you complain, you pull the purple band to bring you back to reality. So even something as small as that. So we're going to wrap up right now and leave you thinking about all of the areas of your life that you're tolerating things that you shouldn't be. And the other side of that coin is how you can flex that muscle called becoming more intolerant. They sound similar, but they're actually two different things. One is more of a proactive, flex the muscle called I want to be intolerant in all areas of my life. The other one is reactive, where you're already intolerant of so many things and they're creeping into all areas of your life. So I'm done with my piece. Pat, why don't you wrap up?
I think at this point you got the idea, so now let's get into some applications. So now let's talk about some applications that you can employ to help you apply this issue of tolerance, intolerance. So starting out, one of the things I'd recommend is revisit Module 1, which was values-based decision making. And if it's fresh and you still have your values listed and you went through the whole exercise like you were supposed to, you might not have to go back and redo the whole thing. If it's been a while and you feel like maybe it's faded a little bit and you need to do a refresher there, go back and do a refresher. But once you have done that foundational exercise, which is very foundational, which is why it was Module 1, the next thing to do now is to take those values that you've identified and then look across the span of your business in different areas, employees, customers, vendors, anywhere that you can, including yourself. Take a look in the mirror, right? You like to do that, Rick. He's always making us look in the mirror. Take a look in the mirror, and at that point, start writing down, based on these values, what am I tolerating as far as my employees are concerned? Based on these values, what am I tolerating as far as my customers are concerned that I should not be tolerating? You know, and I think one of the things that's, again, a mother's, father's, teacher's, preacher thing as far as that we have drilled into our brains, we've learned tolerance as a virtue, right? When you look at international affairs and you look at foreign policy and you look at cultures that clash and everything else, you know, diplomacy is equated to tolerance. Forget diplomacy. You're in business. You're looking to make a profit. You're not there to be the United Nations. As a matter of fact, look at the United Nations and how dysfunctional that is because of all their tolerance. It's a matter of now coming and saying, you got a business, you got values, you got profits to make, you've got stakeholders in that business who rely on not your tolerance, they rely on your intolerance. So find out those values, make the list, and then go down the varying aspects of saying employees, customers, vendors, anywhere that you can, anything that touches your business, and say, where am I tolerating that I shouldn't based on these values that I have? And as obvious as this might sound, I will tell you it is a magnificent transformation.
And when's the best time to start being intolerant? I have a relative, it's a woman, and I've known her my whole life, and she has an issue in her marriage. And she said, what is the problem in my marriage? And oftentimes I use personal examples to hammer home a business point. That's what I'm doing right now. And I said, here's the problem with you. Can I speak freely? She said, yes. I said, the first time your husband came home late, the very first time your husband came home late, you said nothing. So that allowed him to say to himself, okay, she doesn't mind if I come home late. Then he started coming home the next day, and then he'd be gone for 3 or 4 days at a time. And she said, yeah, and now you're probably listening going, well, of course, that's crazy. But here's the point. She was completely tolerant of behavior that didn't belong in a marriage at all. And she didn't know what to say or what to do. I could tell you with my wife, the minute I'm off kilter just a little bit, she has zero tolerance for that, and she smacks me back in line.
And that's true. I've seen it.
But isn't that how it should be? And Steve Jobs, we talked about him at the beginning of the module. His life is being celebrated right now. But guess what? He was extremely hard to work with. He was extremely pig-headed. He was extremely intolerant of things at Apple. Yet he's being celebrated right now. So Patrick, what gives here? So here's the thing. I took a course once in 1994. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. The professor teaching the course, it was a weekend program that I took. It was in Austin, Texas, of all places. And he said, the least effective behavior for a company or an individual is being nice. Now, he didn't mean that you shouldn't be civil and all that, but we've interpreted being nice as being accommodating. If you have a big business culture that is accommodating to all comers, okay, that's destructive. Southwest Airlines is more profitable than all the other American airlines combined. It also has a larger market capitalization than all the other American airlines combined. Now, one of their business principles, business strategies is we're only going to buy one plane. And that plane seats about 110 people. It's a Boeing 737. So they're intolerant of taking on other planes and being available to commuters who want to travel in larger planes and go longer distances. They're intolerant of that. If somebody calls Southwest and says, I want to fly from New York to Moscow nonstop, no, we don't do that. But most businesses, like Patrick said, are accommodating to all. That is the opposite of business strategy. And you're going to learn more about business strategy in another module this year. But here's the bottom line. The more intolerant you could be, the more successful, believe it or not, you can be. Think about that.
Another thing I'd like to make as a distinction is the issue of, and maybe I'll characterize it this way, rational intolerance. Meaning, I've been around people who are intolerant, but they're not rationally intolerant. They're just kind of grouchy. They're kind of miserable. They basically fly off the handle without understanding when they don't need to. They're what I would call temperamental. And that isn't a service to you, your business, your stakeholders, etc. So I am talking about rational tolerance, not irrational, I tolerate nothing at all for any reason whatsoever. And I know it's maybe a difficult distinction to make, but for example, if there's a seminar session going on, and I've seen this, and there's a problem with the technology and the speaker's about to go present, I've seen some of these prima donna speakers just abuse people who are trying to help them. The people there saying, they didn't create the problem. It could be a technological failure that was beyond the control of the presenter or the AV staff that's there, and they're jumping into action trying to help and trying to work with this person, but the person is being completely intolerant, that this is this whole thing is a crisis, and he's going to blame the nearest person, whether that person is responsible for it or not, and indeed that's the person that could help them transcend the whole problem or challenge that they're having. So be intolerant, but be rationally intolerant, not irrationally intolerant.
I hope that you understand the spirit that Patrick is trying to convey in this module, and that you look at your life from the perspective of getting where you want to get using the three words of simplicity, probability, and leverage, not, with Patrick's example, looking for ways to be intolerant where you're adding more stress and strain to your life. So this is a very subtle but powerful difference that we want you to internalize. So this word intolerant is more fully defined and fully laid out in your implementation guide. Our objective here is to whet your appetite in the application section to give you a little bit more flavor so you can put these applications on the ground. And then the last piece is the implementation guide. Also, if you're in an accountability group, why not have a few calls on this topic and try to uncover with each other, what am I tolerating in my business? Maybe if you ask a third party who knows you very well, they'll point out things that you're tolerating. And if they say it, it's probably true. It's probably the best way to cut through all of the garbage that we hold around us to stop people from telling us the truth. Say to your accountability group or to someone close to you, tell me what I'm tolerating in my life. And I will not get defensive. I want to know. It's very hard for them to say, well, no, everything's fine in your life. If you ask them the question, tell me what I'm tolerating, they'll give you a straight answer.
So in closing up here, first I'd like to speak on behalf of Rick and myself and say that we appreciate that you're rationally tolerating us every single month, looking at our faces on the video, listening to our voices, etc. In all seriousness, we appreciate the fact that you're engaged and involved in what we're doing. And I think that this module, like all the modules, can play a major role in upgrading the quality of your life and your experience, and most certainly can have a massive impact on your business. So take it seriously, but try to have fun with it. Make sure you print out the implementation guide, get to work, get the work done before next month so that you're ready and prepared for the module that's coming next, which I think you're going to love. So on behalf of Rick Sapio and myself, thanks very much for being a part. Thank you for watching this module of Business Finishing School. Let your business brain finish what your entrepreneurial heart started.